The Railway series turns 80 years old this year, so I thought it was best to save a video like this for this occasion. Since I didn't really do a video for the show's 40th anniversary, I thought, hey, why not save this video for the 80th anniversary of the Railway series? I mean, it may not be about the Railway series, but hey, it's connected to the Railway series anyway. After the second season of Thomas and Friends, the show would go on a break as some of the staff did other things after season 2. Britt Allcroft traveled overseas to make Thomas more accessible for other countries, and David Mitton would go on to make Tugs. I'd like to rank all the episodes of Tugs at some point, but I feel like that has to be a milestone video. But anyway, at some point later on, everyone came back to make season 3 of Thomas and Friends. And let me just say, rewatching this season as an adult, this might be one of my favorites. I don't think I watched it all as a kid, but I do remember watching a good chunk of season 3, but not as much as a couple other seasons. But watching it again as an adult, I really love some of these episodes. So before we begin, I just want to say that this ranking is based on my own opinion. Nostalgia will definitely influence some of my picks, but considering a lot of people in the fandom have different tastes with what kind of stories they enjoy from the show, I guess that's a given. Also, not gonna lie, this is probably the hardest ranking that I've done so far because all the good episodes from this season, they're really good. So with the comments, be civil, be respectful, and no one cares about your opinion. With all that said, let's start with the ranking of Season 3 of Thomas and Friends. Also, last time I checked, 99% of the people who watch my videos haven't subscribed, so if you like my vids, please like the video and subscribe. Support means a lot to me.
Ouch! You look fruity!
This is probably one of the most nothing burger episodes in the whole show. Granted, I do have some nostalgia with it since I remember watching this one a lot as a kid, but now, every time I rewatch it as an adult, I dislike it more and more. Percy and James's conflict in this episode is stupid, and the climax is even worse. Whenever two characters are in conflict in one of these episodes, it's usually for an understandable reason, even if it is petty. The conflict starts because James gives Percy shit for the trucks giving him trouble.
That's no excuse, Percy.
Like hell it's not an excuse, the trucks are the cause of most of the accidents in this damn show! James should know how problematic the trucks are, considering one of his first appearances was falling off the tracks because of the trucks he was pulling. So, why is James getting on Percy's case for having trouble with the trucks? And the ending is just so stupid. Percy and James are moping, and then Thomas goes on about how they're really useful because they learned a lesson? What is the lesson? What is the message here? I don't think I would be talking about this if Thomas didn't bring that up, so what did James and Percy learn exactly? Not every episode of this show had a moral or lesson to learn, but if it needed something like that, then what were kids supposed to take away from this episode? What were they supposed to learn? I probably wouldn't be talking about this if there was no lesson, but the episode tries to have a lesson and it doesn't make any sense. There's also a ton of fruit puns that make up a good chunk of the dialogue, and sure, they can be clever since, well, it's about Percy and James taking a fruit train, but they get old after the third time.
Got yourself in a bit of a jam, eh, James? A sticky situation? Not funny having jammed brakes. There's more than one way to get jammed.
I need pills.
Percy also sucks here because despite the fact James was rude to him at the start, Percy is annoying when he's gloating about James's failure, so at the end of the episode, I don't really like either of them. Gotta say though, what the hell is this shot here? Like, did they actually spray hand soap on Percy's face? Like, what is this? This always bewildered me as a kid. But really, it's not the worst episode of the show, but man, it is easily the worst episode of season 3. I don't think some people will agree with this episode being so low on the list, but in my eyes, this is one of the worst episodes of the classic era.
You're a fraud, you know that? What? You're a fake.
I don't think anyone is going to be surprised that this episode is ranked so low. Gordon is pretty out of character in this episode, but there's still a couple things I like. But like, you expect me to believe that Gordon of all characters, to not care about his appearance? The pompous and grand express engine of Sodor? That Gordon? Not to mention, why wouldn't Gordon know the rule of engines needing washdowns? I think it is due to this being a rewrite of a story from the Railway series that takes place after Gordon takes a dip, which was adapted back in season 1, but if that's the case, is it not possible to adapt the actual story with this plot point? Season 4 did that despite the stories being out of order, so why couldn't Season 3 do that with this episode? But I like the scene where Gordon helps a fellow engine up the hill after James slips down the hill and he banks the train, which is something Edward would normally do for Gordon. Thomas asking Sir Topham Hatt if Gordon could pull coaches again is a nice character moment for him since he's standing up for Gordon, but it is a bit confusing since the narrator pointed out that Gordon was pulling trucks for the rest of the day and not for a week or some other amount of time. Also, the scene where Gordon sprays mud on James is pretty funny. I don't think it's a good episode since Gordon is out of character for a good chunk of the episode, but it's definitely not the absolute worst from the show.
Now, Ben, stick him up! What?
I think some people would place this lower, but I don't think this episode is as bad as the last two. Now, I never really talked about Bill and Ben a whole lot in the last ranking, but they get 2 episodes to themselves this season. I like them just fine, but they're not really my favorite characters from the show. I don't think this is the worst episode with Bill and Ben, and they still feel in character, but I wouldn't call it a well-written episode. Bill and Ben's conflict is petty and stupid, but it does fall in line with their childish nature, but it's the conclusion I have an issue with. So because Ben can't pull the train by himself, they just start laughing and then make up? Okay then. It just feels a bit anticlimactic. I think there was a better way to handle this, like maybe one of the twins screws up by being reckless while he's grumbling about the other and that causes the other twin to rescue that twin. I don't know, I feel like there are better ways to handle this story. But I don't think anyone is really out of character. It's nice to see Boko again and set up a plan to get the twins to make up, and I also like the scene he has with Edward. I just wish these two interacted in the show more. Overall though, I have nothing else to say. It's definitely an episode with Bill and Ben.
My old railway still misses me, but their aim is getting better!
And here's the first episode focusing on Thomas. And I don't think this is the best episode focusing on Thomas. The story is kind of messy, but I still think it's okay. But given that this is the first episode on the list with Thomas, I think it's a good time to discuss Thomas's character growth. An episode from Season 1 or Season 2 would usually start with Thomas being cheeky or just being a general pain to others, but at the start of this episode, Thomas is cheerful and pleasant. And when Birdie says you can't trust anything that runs on rails, Thomas from the previous seasons would probably clap back at Birdie, but he doesn't, and tells Birdie that he would help him. I said that Thomas was kind of in the teen phase in the ranking of Season 2, and in Season 3, I would say he's kind of in the young adult phase. The story itself, though, is kind of a mess. Pretty sure it's an adaptation of trucks from the Railway series, but without the narrow gauge engines, and I can definitely see that, but I don't think it's as well written as the Season 4 episode. I bring up that episode and not that story from the Railway series because I still haven't read the Railway series. Anyway, the story really gets going when Birdie brings up that the railway was supposed to bring tar to fix the road and goes on about how you can't trust anything on rails, which leads Thomas to say that Birdie could trust him, hence the name of the episode. Then the episode completely forgets about this and spends a good chunk of the episode with James and Gordon playing a trick on Thomas. The crash is cool, but did the episode decide that the plot point with the tar wasn't interesting enough to make a whole episode about it? And the ending is confusing because all of a sudden Thomas remembers the road and tells Edward about it, and James and Gordon apologize and Birdie thanks Thomas for telling Edward about the road so it can be repaired. That's nice and all, but do James and Gordon face any consequences for tricking Thomas? So yeah, this episode is not good. I like seeing Thomas's growth as a more pleasant character and the crash is really cool, but the story in my eyes is kinda messy. So I think it's overall just an okay episode, bordering on being bad.
Could you hold these, please? Why? Because they're filled with dynamite.
Now we get to the episode that adapted a story that basically confirmed Gordon's family is dead, aside from Flying Scotsman. That aside though, the episode focuses on 2 different plots and it feels a bit weird. Gordon is getting badgered by the other engines for taking so much water and the other engines tease him about boiler ache. Okay. Then Gordon sees 2 tenders from another engine, and yeah, we all know who that engine is, which makes Gordon want another tender, alright? And then Diesel comes up and goes on about how diesels are taking over, which makes Gordon upset. Okay, so the episode is gonna be about Gordon not letting Diesel's words get to him and prove his worth in the process? No, Sir Topham Hatt just tells him that he wouldn't scrap Gordon or any of his other engines, and then the rest of the episode focuses on Henry. Huh? I don't think it's as bad as Trust Thomas, but it's still weird that they resolved that plot point so quickly and didn't make it the plot for the whole episode. But Henry getting Duck's tenders is pretty funny. Nice to see that Duck is still a clever trickster. Henry pulling the dirty tenders is pretty funny. As much as I wish the episode didn't abandon the plot with Gordon, this was also a clever way to tie in those 2 plot points, with Gordon at first wanting 2 tenders, and then Henry gets 6 more tenders, but not the kind of tenders that he wanted. Honestly, I don't have much else to say. It's just another Season 3 episode.
I am not racist!
I am!
For fuck's sake, James!
An episode focusing on James, and this one is also okay. It's nothing too crazy, just James pulling a trick and redeeming himself for it. Although it's definitely not his best episode. James is still his vain and self-important self, which is why he's such a fun character, but the story is just kind of... It's not a bad episode, but it's not very special either. Usually I like episodes where nothing special happens, but this one is just there and feels like it was made just so James can have another episode to himself for this season. James is being vain and puffed up, pulls a trick on Thomas by telling him the coaches are for him and the trucks are for Gordon. He gets caught, he's stuck in the shed, he redeems himself by shunting and takes a railway inspector to meet Sir Topham Hatt. It's such a whatever story with James. But since it's in the episode, let's talk about the harbor set. This is definitely an upgrade from the harbor that was in Season 2. All the buildings, cranes, and boats look so real. The harbor from Season 2 was already impressive and looked pretty real, but this set took all that and amped it up from 10 to 11. Yeah, no joke for James. It's an episode. I know I'm really not saying a whole lot for some of these episodes so far, but I assure you, I'll have some more things to say about some of the episodes I actually consider good.
I am not electric, young lady. I am very useful.
An episode that focuses on Toby this time. And while I watched this episode quite a bit, I think even as a kid, this wasn't one of my all-time favorites. The story doesn't do a whole lot of showing a new side to Toby, but it's a nice story showing more of James and Toby's dynamic. James goes on about being the pride of the line and whatever, and I love how Toby just replies with, "Says you," with that blank look on his face. Toby just doesn't care what James has to say, and I love it. Gotta say though, why didn't the station master know about Toby? If he's new here, shouldn't he have been told about all the engines that operate on the railway? Or is that not how it works on railways? I don't know, I just felt like someone should have given him like a list of the engines that work on the railway or tell him about all the engines. But the mix of Toby's theme in this is pretty sad. You do feel pretty bad for Toby in this situation, but I don't know what else to say about this story. It's definitely less confusing than some of the other episodes we talked about, but honestly, nothing interesting happens. But it definitely has one of the funnier moments of the season where the boys are teasing James and Toby comforts James. James in the UK dub is like, "Ha ha!" I normally prefer the US dub, but I gotta give it to the UK dub for that. So yeah, I wish Toby didn't have such an underwhelming episode, but I think it's a bit better written than some of the others. Some people will probably disagree with this, but who knows, maybe I'll change my mind about this episode at some point.
Edward! Diesel 10's picking on me on the internet!
I don't think a lot of fans talk about this episode. I mean, I don't consider it one of my all-time favorite episodes from the show, but it's a pretty interesting episode in the fact that it mainly focuses on the road characters. Edward is also in this, but the story is mostly focused on Trevor. Bertie and Terrence are also in this episode, and it's nice to see them again. Terrence doesn't really speak in this episode, unfortunately. Hey guys, it's me, Jade from the future, and I meant to say that Terrence only had one line of dialogue, and he doesn't really do a whole lot for the story, so Yeah, just like a lot of his appearances in the show, so yeah, back to the video. But I think at least in the classic era, Birdie and Trevor are the only two road characters to get at least one or a few more episodes focused on them. Much as we love the trains, it's always nice to get episodes with focus outside of the railway. Trevor is pretty endearing, and I like that we get to see more of that caring side to him. You can make all the jokes about his line from Save from Scrap all you want, but that desire to make less fortunate children happy with a party and helping them get to the seaside is so sweet. Birdie is pretty interesting since him putting down Trevor shows that he can be pretty full of himself. It was kind of shown in Thomas and Birdie's Great Race, but I think this episode does a better job at showing that more egotistical side to Birdie. I don't think I would have included Edward's name in the title though, since it's definitely a Trevor episode more than an Edward episode at the end of the day. But Edward does play a nice role in it, once again helping Trevor since they are pretty good friends after all. So it's definitely not my favorite episode from the show, but it's still a good one, and the first episode on the list I'd say I actually like.
Up yours, Percy!
I have a lot of fond memories with this one, but my opinion on this episode has waned over the years. Percy got quite a few episodes this season, but this episode definitely isn't my favorite for him. Winter settings are always a win for me, and Season 3's are fantastic. The opening with the snow blowing around is really cool, and I love how they went the extra mile to stick snow on Thomas and Percy. The story is pretty funny. Percy insulting Henry's small funnel, and Henry's face being like, "Excuse you?" And that moment is so good. And his obsession with scarves coming to end in the way it does is so funny, but like, how did the porters not hear Percy coming? Steam engines in real life are loud, big, and heavy machines. I feel like you would hear one coming if it was nearby. Also, I don't know why, but I love the expression on Sir Topham Hatt in this shot. He just looks so unsettled. I also like the ending with Henry. If this were season 1 or 2 Henry, I feel like he'd make a snarky comment at Percy, but Henry decides to reel it in here. Season 3 is notorious for making Henry the softer of the three big engines, and I think it really fits for his character. So yeah, an episode with Percy is higher than some of the others on the list, but Percy is one of my favorites, so I guess that isn't a surprise.
Find someone to take care of these ducks right now and get back to work, or you're fired!
And we finally get to an episode about Duck. And it's also the episode where he gets his branch line. Donald also gets some screen time on his own, separate from Douglas, which is cool because I think this season is the first time any of the twin characters get a single episode to themselves. I don't think Bill or Ben got an episode to themselves though. This is one of the more humorous episodes of Season 3. The trick Duck's crew play on Donald is funny, although why did they think putting a duckling in Donald's water tank was a good idea? Wouldn't it suffocate in there? And the prank Donald's crew play on Duck is also clever. This episode is just these characters having some good, harmless fun. Well, mostly harmless. And the duckling is pretty cute. But I think this is a good time to talk about the sets here. The Little Western is absolutely gorgeous. The coastline here, this village, and this set with the boat resting there, man, it looks like a painting has come to life with these sets. I feel like I'm going to be talking about the other sets of this season more later on, but I will still say that this season's sets are some of my favorites in the whole show. One thing Season 3 did quite well was expanding Duck as a character, and this episode did a good job establishing his own branch line.
I'd punch that rain in the face. What are you talking about? No, you...
Yeah, people are not gonna like that this episode is lower than some of the others. I can definitely see why people love it, but it's just not one of my favorites. But no doubt, this is definitely one of the best moments for Bill and Ben. Bill and Ben are known for being mischievous, but this episode shows here that they really can take their job seriously when it matters. They get tricked by the trucks, resulting in the yard being a complete mess and the express being late, much to Gordon's annoyance. But when they're back at the quarry, a landslide happens, and it's up to the twins to get the staff to safety. This episode shows that Bill and Ben aren't just mischievous, immature troublemakers, but are also hardworking engines who will be professional and hardworking despite that. Them being called heroes by the Fat Controller really feels earned. The rocks falling is pretty awesome, and it really shows how much experience the team got from Tugs in terms of practical effects. The first 2 seasons had practical effects, sure, but Season 3's effects are definitely more impressive here, and will only get better with another season we'll look at later. It's not only impressive with all the buildings being destroyed in the process of the rock slide, but I love how seriously the situation is taken. It's a great sequence that shows how devastating a rock slide can be. So I don't think it's one of my favorite episodes of the season, but man, it's a good one. But who knows, maybe I'll rank it higher if I redo this list someday.
I didn't ask for your opinion.
Too bad, I gave it to you anyway.
Another episode focused on Duck, and the first episode on the list featuring Oliver. Plus we get the first case of a more extremist road character, Bulgy. We'll see another extremist road character later, but Bulgy was kind of the first one. I like how this episode shows us that partnership with Duck and Oliver. They confide in each other while they're dealing with Bulgy, they banter with each other, they feel like real work partners. Bulgy is also a nice addition. He's not as interesting or funny as some other extremist road characters that we'll meet later, but he serves his purpose well. He really feels like the antithesis to Birdie, as while Birdie may get into spats with the engines, he still respects and works with the railway, while Bulgy feels like he can do everything by himself. And it backfires on him in the best way possible. Duck crossing the bridge is very tense and another good example of how much the practical effects have improved from the last 2 seasons. This episode couldn't have ended better the way it did. Seeing Bulgy become a henhouse is low-key pretty satisfying considering how rude he was to Duck and Oliver, as well as disregard for his passengers. So yeah, this is a good one.
I have your IP, your home address too.
This is the first time a Christmas episode has gotten higher than 20, and this is easily the best Christmas episode of the show. At least in terms of the classic series, because I have not watched a lot of CGI stuff. Or Thanksgiving, according to the US dub, but come on, it's clearly a Christmas episode. The winter setting in this episode is probably the best it's ever been in the show. That compilation with the winter storm at night and then transitioning to the next day with everyone hard at work, it really conveys how inconvenient this kind of weather can be when it comes to people who need to get to work or something. The story is everything a Christmas episode should be. Everyone comes together to help each other during this brutal snow day, from Thomas, Percy, Harold, Terrence, Toby, the villagers. Everyone does their part to help each other. That's what happened in the last 2 Christmas episodes, but it's on a bigger scale this episode since an entire village needs help and not just one character. I just love how this episode ends. The villagers coming together to repay the kindness the engines showed them that day gives me the same feeling of watching a Christmas movie. How they painted the shed so fast though, I'd rather not think too hard about that, it's a sweet thing regardless. Wasn't exactly the biggest fan of the previous Christmas episodes, but this one in particular is really good, and I think everyone can agree that this is the best Christmas episode of the classic series.
Little engines can't do anything!
Now we're getting to my favorites, and this episode focuses on Thomas this time. And it's a great example of Thomas's character development compared to the last 2 seasons. In the last 2 seasons, Thomas was selfish and a bit self-centered, but this episode shows how much he's grown. When he derails on the bent tracks, the first thing he thinks about is his passengers. If this were Thomas from the last 2 seasons, he'd probably be grumbling and throw a bit of a hissy fit, which would still be understandable. But instead, he first thinks about his passengers. There's also the fact he waited for the school children to get into Annie and Clarabelle despite the fact he would already be late. He's putting others' needs before his own, which is a step up from the more selfish personality he had from the last 2 seasons. Doesn't mean he still doesn't have some traits from his older self though. When his branch line is being repaired, he's pretty mopey while he has to shunt in the yards, but honestly, it's pretty understandable here. He doesn't have the regular routine he had before, and he also misses his passengers. Don't mean to stereotype or anything, but Thomas appeals to lots of people who have autism, and I think Thomas being sad with the change happening because of something beyond his control is an accurate portrayal of how I, as someone with autism, can handle change. Not really angry, just mildly upset or annoyed. Gotta say though, I really didn't like Percy in this episode. He gets it into Thomas's head that Sir Topham Hatt would replace him for being late, and honestly, it just doesn't go anywhere. I like how Birdie is handled though. The friendship he and Thomas have is always nice to see, and at the end of the episode, they feel like genuine work partners. Would have been nice to see more episodes with them working as partners on Thomas's branch line. Overall, this is definitely one of my favorite episodes of the season because of how much it shows Thomas's growth as a character from the last 2 seasons.
Seems like Oliver is dead.
And now for the second episode on the list, focus on Oliver. When the engines hear Oliver's story and the compliments go to his head, he becomes a bit insufferable and thinks he can do everything. I said before in my video where I talked about his arcane merchant counterpart that he had a superiority complex in the show, but this is really the only episode where it's shown. Well, at least in the model series. But at the end of the episode, he learns the hard way that he's not perfect. Sure, he has a great story to tell, but at the end of the day, he's still prone to making mistakes. His inexperience with the trucks feels pretty in line with his basis, since the 1400 was primarily designed for passenger trains, so he probably didn't pull trucks a whole lot, or if he even worked with them at all. And that inexperience causes him to make a fool of himself and Donald and Douglas to miss their trains. Duck fumbling words is also pretty funny. Good gracious lives in my head rent-free. Only thing I could really complain about is that the next episode about the story isn't until the next season. Overall, it's a great episode teaching that despite your status or whatever you went through, you're still a human, or in this case, engine, like everyone else, and will make mistakes if you don't keep your ego in check.
We could put the bees down.
And here's the best James episode of this season. I watched the Best of James DVD a lot as a kid, and this was always one of my favorite episodes from it. It's another episode that doesn't really have a lesson. James is acting like his vain self and doesn't really listen to Boko about the bees, although even then, James really didn't do anything to the bees. But it's still so funny to see James trying to get rid of the bees, particularly spinning on the turntable. Like, that is hilarious. This episode also stood out with this animated bee. I think even when I was a kid that stood out to me since the models aren't animated. I think the only other animation the show has is the stop motion the show will occasionally do with the human characters. Also, I didn't notice this until I watched this episode at some point when I got older, but the guy falling when the bees broke out is so damn funny. So, I don't really have anything amazing to say about this episode like some of the others, but I really enjoy this episode a lot.
Hey Diesel, remember that one time I liked you? No. Good, because it never happened.
And now we have one of the only episodes with Diesel. And I really like how this episode follows up on the Duck and Diesel episodes from Season 2. Duck and Percy have a lot of work at the harbor lately, and despite other engines chipping in to help, it's not enough, so the Fat Controller has to borrow another engine to help with the workload. And unfortunately for Duck and Percy, that engine is Diesel. I love how this episode shows that Diesel really hasn't changed at all. I just really like Diesel as a character, just the fact that he's a Class 08, an engine designed for shunting rolling stock, but he can't handle trucks at all. The irony is just so good. Gotta say though, why did Duck and Percy let Diesel's comments about them being tattletales get to them? Diesel has already caused trouble before, and they're handling goods which are likely supplies that people need for their work, so why didn't they tell the Fat Controller he was causing issues regardless of being called tattletales? This is a work environment. If someone is causing problems, the supervisor needs to know. But Diesel's own clumsiness is his own undoing, and that's a far more satisfying comeuppance since it shows that Diesel really is his own worst enemy. Overall, nothing big happens, but it just shows that Diesel hasn't changed at all when he was on Sodor the last time. Some engines don't change, and Diesel at this point in the show is clearly a lost cause. And in my opinion, that's one of the best ways to follow up on Diesel's character.
Do you mind if I take a quick look around your house? I'm afraid you may have hippies.
Welp, here's the big one. The episode, infamous for being that episode Wilbur Audrey himself hated. Yet, funnily enough, this is probably one of the most loved episodes of the show. I have not seen a single Thomas fan who hates this episode. Henry's struggle is pretty relatable. I think everyone has a special place in their life that they love and get attached to, and it's pretty sad when it's taken away. Whether it be a store, a park, or any other type of building or location, we as people can get attached to certain places, whether it be because we like being there or because we have a lot of fond memories there. And I think the struggle Henry goes through is pretty natural for a show like Thomas. These characters aren't just trains, they also have feelings, thoughts, and desires. So I think it's perfectly in line for a world like this for these sentient locomotives to get attached to certain places. I think Henry being the softer of the three big engines makes sense, since he always felt like the less egotistical of the three. I like Grumpy Henry, but I also like seeing the softer side to Henry. The music in this episode is also fantastic. The ending music has such a hopeful, calming melody to it. It really combines the happiness Henry is feeling of new life that has come with the new trees and the peacefulness of the forest. So while Wilbert Audrey hated this episode, I would respectfully disagree. It's a favorite episode for a lot of fans, and for very good reason.
You're full of crap, Gordon! You know the Express is due in 5 minutes!
This was one of my favorite Gordon episodes as a kid. This is also one of the first episodes to have a real-life engine in the show, City of Churro. I was pretty curious about City of Churro when I was a kid. That shade of green, those side rods, this engine didn't look like any of the colorful trains that I was used to seeing in the show. It was also the first time I ever heard the word celebrity before. But of course, this episode is about Gordon. And this is easily one of the best moments of Gordon's pompous personality backfiring on him. He goes on about how domeless engines are not respectable due to his own jealousy, and when the wind blows his dome off, the irony there is just everything. I love how the dome is blown off of Gordon. It came loose slowly and then is blown off when Gordon is on the bridge and the dome falling into the water. This always stood out to me as a kid, and I have no idea why. Maybe it's because it's part of an engine getting lost in the water. I don't know, but that whole sequence always stuck with me. Ending is actually fantastic, with Gordon coming back to the sheds and one of the engines throwing his own words back at him. Who do you think it was? Thomas? Duck? Edward, perhaps? As much as I enjoy Gordon's humility, I also love his pompous side just as much. And I think this episode is one of the best examples of that side of Gordon's character.
Having trouble, Mavis? I am surprised.
Finally, we're at the episode that introduces one of my favorite characters in the show, Mavis. Mavis, like a lot of young engines, is full of her own ideas and thinks she knows what to do best, to the point where Toby gets fed up with trying to talk sense into her. But unlike Diesel, Mavis isn't malicious at all. She's just inexperienced and full of her own ideas, kind of like how Thomas was in Season 1. Diesel goading her about Diesel's being better and Mavis getting more big-headed really shows that despite how feisty and snippy she is, her believing Diesel further shows how naive she is. Think it might also have to do with her also being a Diesel, so being the impressionable and naive young engine she is, of course she would believe Diesel over the more experienced Toby, whom she considers a fusspot. It all comes to a head when Mavis gets stuck on the slope. Instead of doing what Toby told her to do, she does things her way by stopping right at the end of the hill, getting stuck, which causes trouble for others. I especially love the line with the angry farmer telling Mavis just what she could do with her train. Not gonna lie, I really want to know what he was actually saying to Mavis. Toby tried warning her, but in some cases like this, some youngsters need to learn the hard way. And I like how Toby lightly jokes about her predicaments. I love how much of a funny old man Toby can be, rightfully laughing at the young ones when they screw up or just generally being stupid. Toby pushing Mavis to the other side was always kinda tense to me as a kid. Maybe it's the music they used. Mavis is definitely one of the more underused characters in my opinion, at least in terms of the model series, but she's still one of my favorite characters in the series, and the episode where she's introduced is one of my favorite episodes of Season 3.
Water's nothing to an engine with determination.
Quit saying that.
I absolutely love this episode, and it's easily one of my favorite Percy episodes, but I just couldn't put it higher than the next 6 episodes. This particular episode is where we see that side to Percy that will go through great lengths for his friends, especially for Thomas. Usually he's cheeky and naive in most of the episodes he was in before, but Percy is very admirable here. He made a promise and he's gonna do everything he can to keep it. I always wondered why the water looked like orange juice, but rewatching it as an adult, I think the water would be pretty dirty since, well, it's water covering the rails, so it's most likely pretty dirty from all the dirt and other stuff. The way they did the rain is amazing, definitely a step up from Edward's exploit. The water dripping on Percy and the way they lit the set really shows how bad the weather really is. And the river flowing here is also a pretty cool detail. The music is also fantastic. It really conveys how hard this is for Percy, but he's not gonna give up. The end of the episode is such a triumphant moment for Percy. The Fat Controller calling him really useful at the end feels more than earned considering what Percy had to go through. If I had to make a top 20 favorite episodes of the show like T1, E2, H3 did, I think this would definitely make it up there or at least be an honorable mention. I love this episode. I don't have anything relevant to this cutaway, so bazinga. And now for the second episode with Mavis and the episode that completes the main character arc Mavis goes through. But before we talk about that, I love how this episode handles the winter setting. It starts off with the quarry covered in snow, but as the weather gets warmer a few days later, there's still some snow, but a good chunk of it has melted. I really like that detail. But anyway, I love how this episode follows up on the episode introducing Mavis. She's still impatient and inexperienced, but she really proves at the end of the episode that she is useful. Toby hanging over the broken bridge is very tense, and while I don't think falling would result in Toby damaged beyond repair since, well, it's not a very tall bridge, but because of Mavis's help, something pretty serious was prevented. Sure, the stunt she pulled was pretty stupid, but I think her saving Toby made up for it. Mavis has a pretty nice character arc going from snippy and naive to a responsible and caring engine who usually gets her job done. Like I said before, I think Mavis was underused and deserved more episodes in the model series with her as the focus. But these two episodes still tell a good story with her.
Hey, Percy! What? Dragon!
And now for an episode that follows up from Percy's ghostly trick. And to be honest, as funny as Woolly Bear was, I think this is a better follow-up. But that could be biased because I watched this episode more as a kid. Percy is still riding that high from scaring Thomas, and instead of roasting Percy like he does in Woolly Bear, he just humors Percy a bit and then goes back to sleep. Thomas is just so done with Percy's shit in this episode. And he inadvertently does get his own payback when he's delivering the Chinese dragon. The Chinese dragon is such a cool looking prop, and the way it's lit is so cool. And that music, especially that jingle there with Thomas puffing over the bridge with the dragon, I really love that shot. It's so good. And the way the music builds up to when Percy gets scared by the dragon, it's such a tense piece of music and I absolutely love it. And the message, while a bit on the nose at the end, is actually a pretty nice lesson for children to learn. It's pretty much saying that there's really no shame in admitting to others that you're scared, since doing so means you are pretty brave in a way. But like Percy's ghostly trick, it's still a pretty safe story and not too scary for a child. Hell, I watched this episode a lot when I was a little kid and I loved it. So yeah, another banger from Season 3. I don't think anyone wouldn't have this episode in their top 5 favorite episodes of Season 3. I think it might actually be the most beloved Thomas and Friends episode. Oliver is such a fascinating character because of the fact he's tied to real-world events regarding steam engines. The show has mentioned scrap before and even showed what a vehicle about to be scrapped would look like in Season 2, but I think doing that with a steam engine hits harder. The show is focused on the train, so this hits more to the point of scrap being a pretty dark topic for the engines. Oliver's pre-solder look is pretty impressive to look at. All that grime, the rust, it must have taken a lot of time and effort to work on this particular model for Oliver. And of course, the whole rescue sequence is just fantastic. From Douglas and Oliver's crews working fast to get Oliver ready to be taken away, to Douglas coupling up to Oliver, and then when they start and that part of the music kicks in, it's so good. It's not my favorite piece of music in this season, but it's definitely the best one. The sets of this episode are also phenomenal. The scrapyard is a pretty eerie looking set, and apparently this is actually a reused set for this location, and if that's the case, damn, they did a great job because I don't see any similarities from this set to any other sets from the show. I also love how they lit the sets, like this shot right here, beautiful, just beautiful. But to go back to this episode relating to real-world events, I think a story like this of a steam engine escaping after British Railways withdrew steam engines and replaced them with diesels is such a genius story to tell with sentient locomotives. Sure, I could imagine a story like this being told from a human's perspective with a human character getting attached to a vehicle he loves so much, but I think making that vehicle an actual character to humanize them makes a story like this hit harder, driving home the fact that scrap is death for these characters. So while it may not be my number one favorite episode of Season 3, this episode more than deserves all the praise and love it gets from fans. This episode is definitely high on the list because of how beautiful it looks and also because it has my favorite track in the season, but that doesn't mean it still doesn't tell a good story. The story is about Thomas and Percy taking the post train at night, and when Henry is late, Percy and his crew try to make up for lost time, but the person in charge of the post train complains to the fat controller, so Percy and Thomas have to work extra hard that night. There's even more pressure when Harold comes down to taunt the engines about the post train being scrapped and using him instead. Thomas and Percy go on about their work, and later on, Thomas and his crew come across a man who missed his train, so they decide to give the guy a lift. Sweet karma for Percy comes along when Harold is grounded from all the strong wind blowing that day. And at the end, the guy Thomas gave a lift to wrote a letter to Sir Topham Hatt praising Thomas and Percy, saying everyone is calling the post train the pride of the line. It's a nice story with a relatable situation. Thomas and Percy feel like partners here, and I like seeing this dynamic to them. They confide in each other and inform each other of what's happening, like actual friends working with each other do. Harold isn't too big of a threat here, but I like that he's there for a reminder of what could happen to the post train if Thomas and Percy aren't quick enough. And the ending is pretty feel good. Now that we got the story out of the way, this episode looks so beautiful! This show looks absolutely amazing at night, and this is probably the best looking episode when it comes to episodes that take place at night. I love the way some buildings are lit up inside, since there would most likely be people who still work at night on this railway. I could go on, but honestly, every shot in this episode is amazing. But it wouldn't be complete if it didn't have the night train theme. This is easily my favorite track from the season. It really gets the lonely, busy vibe of the night train, and it's generally nice to listen to. I'm just gonna say it here. Season 3 might have my favorite soundtrack in the show. I definitely love the soundtrack from the other seasons, but there's just something about this season's soundtrack that just hits in a way. I don't think I have anything else to say about this episode. Let's just get to the number one spot. When I said Season 3 of Thomas & Friends is that season of the show that gets better when you get older, this episode is what I usually think of. When I was a kid, I never really got this episode, like a lot of other fans. But as an adult, it has become one of my favorite episodes of the show, and when I started this ranking, I immediately knew this would be number 1. Duck becomes enamored with the sea and traveling beyond the rails, but Percy doesn't share the sentiments. But Duck realizes his worth when he takes an injured man to Birdie so he can take the man to a hospital. After that, Harold drops a flag for Duck, showing that he can understand what Duck has been feeling lately. And it ends with this absolutely amazing shot. I think David had this framed and he gave it to Britt as a gift, and really, I could definitely see why he would frame this shot in particular because it is just wow. But the deeper message with the value of home is what makes this episode so amazing. We can get bored with our current way of life and want to travel somewhere, but at the end of the day, home is the place that matters most. And it's a pretty simple but heartfelt lesson that the show teaches. Honestly, I think this episode deserves its own video one day. This is probably the hardest ranking I had to do so far, and honestly, I can only imagine how hard Season 4 and 5 are gonna be. But that being said, Season 3 might be my favorite of the seasons I ranked so far. The music, the sets, the development of existing characters, and introduction of new ones, this really was the biggest season of the show yet. Despite what the Reverend Wilbert Audrey had to say about this season, it, along with Tugs, really did a lot for the franchise. Season 1 and 2 are definitely important, but I think it was Season 3 where the show would truly blossom. So if this video is up by then, happy 80th anniversary to the Railway series. And thank you, Mr. Audrey, for all the childhood memories. I may not have grown up with your books, but my life wouldn't be the same without them. You touched so many people's hearts with your stories, whether they be in your books or the TV series. The world would probably be in a darker place if people didn't have your characters to find comfort in. And I know I'm not the only one who will be eternally grateful for that. So with all that said, that was my ranking of Season 3 of Thomas & Friends. I'll see you guys next time for when we rank Season 4. Don't buy Postal 3.